Hey guys, Katie here from Equestrian Movement. We're doing another Training Thursday live, and tonight's topic is what is self-carriage? Has anybody heard of working their horses in a frame or in self-carriage? Would like to know what your idea of what the topic of self-carriage means to you. Because it is one of those really debated, hello Sarah, how are you? Long time no see. One of those really heavily debated topics within the horse industry of what is self-carriage. So if you've got an idea of what you think it is, would love to hear from you. I always find it really interesting. Hi Vanessa, how are you? To hear what other people's interpretations of it is. So I think that self-carriage is can be so confusing because there's so many different interpretations of the term self-carriage. I know people like Vanessa who have done their biomechanics training and musculoskeletal training and whatnot will have a different interpretation of what self-carriage is compared to, the people who follow the classical style of dressage compared to the people who, are trying to get ribbons from the judges interpretation of what self-carriage is. All of those different things is what makes the term self-carriage or working frame or whatever you want to call it confusing. So, we all know that I like to make things super simple and easy, although just because it's simple doesn't mean it's easy. I like that. So I'm going to tell you what I try to achieve when I'm working towards self-carriage. So for me, self-carriage is completely individual to the horse, and the breed it is and the temperament it is. And I'm trying to achieve forwardness, balance, maneuverability that improves their overall soundness and develops their athleticism. So the soundness really is the key there. I work with lots of horses with issues with soundness. It is really where my passion for all of this training came from, was working with a lot of unsound horses. And myself also being broken, working with an exercise physiologist, learning about how to not only manage pain but correct pain through exercise. So our philosophy is movement is medicine, which is basically why we're called equestrian movement in the first place, is because our foundations truly are in using exercise and using movement as medicine to develop a pain-free horse, and then from pain-free and sound to developing their athletic potential. So when we are reducing pain and creating soundness and making movement actually feel good to the horse, we do need to inspire their work ethic. A horse that doesn't want to work and isn't responsive to the aids isn't going to use itself properly, and so that's where pain stems from, is from them not using themselves properly. So it's a combination of how we use our training methods and our trainability of our horses to inspire them to want to work and want to be ridden in the first place. Obviously also ruling out our first do no harm issues that can create problems as well. And then from there, keeping range of movement within joints as healthy as possible in a way that it's evenly distributed throughout the horse's body. So if we have, one side that's more flexible than the other and one side that's more powerful than the other, then we have the different areas of the horse's body moving differently, which is going to just stress that structural soundness. So we're trying to make sure that each sort of joint process within the horse's body has got a similar range of movement to all of the other parts of their body as well. So not asking for more one way than the other, and our horses are always going to be more supple one way, more strong the other, and it's always just that balance of trying to help them out. So that is what self-carriage means to me. I would love to know what it means to you and how you sit on my description of what self-carriage is, and I'll talk a little bit more about those other terms. So, as I said, if we move on from soundness and that our horse is moving evenly through its whole body. Actually, we're not ready to move on from that yet. So when we're talking about soundness, what I'm looking for in a horse also is that their hind legs are tracking up to, this is particularly in trot, their hind legs are tracking up to the prints of their front legs without overreaching, and that both hind legs are having a similar range of movement in their steps. And ideally, although our horses don't start here, ideally we want our horses to be able to extend through both shoulders evenly as well. So when we first start riding a horse, they're always on the forehand. They are conditioned through the way that we ride them to, Vanessa, great description. That's exactly what it means to you as well. Moving with harmony and free of tension. Perfect. I'm glad that you agree with me because you definitely are the professional in this one. So we want the shoulders to reach forward, but that's not where our horses start from. And this is what makes that first part of riding so difficult when we're starting with green horses, and then where so many people go wrong and we end up with unsound horses from the way that they've been ridden that also go bridle lame and whatnot, is that when we first start working them, they're pulling with their chest and their shoulders, and they don't know how to redistribute their weight as well as hold us, and then as well as center their gravity while they're holding us. It's because we change where their center of gravity is. Like if you had somebody on your shoulders that's wiggling around, it would change how you use your center of gravity. And then if you like brace your body awkwardly, like without your core, to try and balance that person on your shoulders, that's where you start developing uneven development through your body, which will eventually, after extended periods of time, lead to pain. And so what we're trying to do with our exercises is we're creating an environmental stress on our horse's body that in the long term improves and enhances their soundness, because we're focusing on that structural integrity of the straightness as well as the suppleness through their body. And that is what is going to give our horses longevity within their career. So that's a lot for a horse to learn, right? And then that's a lot for us to communicate to our horse as well. And then we also have to actually be inspiring to want to be ridden and want to work with us. So there's a lot that goes into this first stage of training, and it's very often skipped because we as horse riders, this isn't where we start to learn. We first learn on the experienced schoolmaster that knows how to do all the tricks and that knows how to work in self-carriage, and we're just learning the buttons. And then, we're expected to take just that button pushing and put it into our own horse and know exactly what to do with them, whether they may be cooperative or uncooperative, they may be using themselves correctly, they may be starting to cheat and fall through the shoulders, drop the hind, work hollow, those kinds of things. And over a period of time, if we continue to work them like that, then it is going to, we're still creating that environmental stress that is conditioning their body. So we're just going to be conditioning their body to be more hollow and to be more crooked. And so that's where you see that long-term breakdown in their soundness. So what we're trying to achieve in this, this first bit is that they are able to use their body freely whilst engaging their core, and then also to be able to move freely within the restraints of our aids and our seat. So, you know, our legs probably don't do that big of a, actually they do. So if we miss the timing of our legs, then we can be telling them to lift their leg at inappropriate times, which is going to create that crookedness in how they're tracking up and extending through the shoulder. Our seat, obviously, you know, even just being in the rising trot puts the horses on the forehand. So if you're working consistently in the rising trot and then you're also tipped forward in your upper body, then you're going to be putting your horse even more on the forehand. And so while that's not necessarily a bad thing, if they're not working freely through their back, then it is going to create long-term issues with stiffness and developmental issues, and then down the track soundness issues, depending on how hard we push them and how hard we ride them. So what we're trying to do is, and then also our bit pressure has the biggest impact in interfering with our horse's movement, in that Vanessa could probably talk a lot more about how it compresses the hyoid and whatnot, but even just you know, the way that they try and balance against the contact means that they're not going to be engaging their postural muscles. They're going to be counterflexing to pull against it if we don't teach them how to follow it properly. And so as a result, we're going to be conditioning crookedness into them. And this is where we then end up with more weight in one shoulder than the other, more range of movement in one shoulder than the other, more lean in one shoulder than the other. And then over time, that is what crookedness in our horses is. And then that's where we'll start to see soundness issues and issues with range of movement and whatnot. So coming back to kind of the crux of it is that we need them to be applying themselves to their job. So that's our forwardness. Now, forwardness isn't speed, and this is what I found really confusing. Mind you, I was very young when I first started to learn to ride, so just concepts in general could be very confusing. But forwardness isn't speed. So when you're told that your horse isn't forward enough, it's not about how fast they are, it's about how much power they have. So if you think about when you're driving a car and you're revving the car, so you're going to be driving a clutch or a stick in the US, I don't know what you guys call it, the gear stick. So if you think about when you're driving a car, like how much rev can you put into the car? That's what your forwardness is. So if you're driving around, I don't even know if there's different types of cars in different parts of the world. I'm going to say a Festiva or a Yaris because that's my lame little cars, that the two-door hatchbacks that I've always driven. And you try and rev them up a hill and you get nothing. But then if you put a more powerful engine in, if you upgrade into a V8, we've just been talking about this one tonight with Sarah because she's been riding Gunner now and he's starting to develop engagement and she's starting to feel a little bit of that power. If you start like upgrading the engine and we get more power, it just is that they're capably putting more effort into their forwardness, and as a result we get better track up, and because they're applying themselves to the forwardness and they're not dragging themselves around, we can start talking about engaging their core and getting tone through the hindquarters for them to kind of sit into them a little bit but also drive out of them. And so then we're also getting that range of movement that we talked about through the hindquarters, and then we're getting that energy to flow on through the rest of their body, which is another concept that also really confused me was, how does energy flow through a horse? So it's not necessarily that the energy is flowing through the horse so much as when all of the muscle groups through their back, like from their hindquarters through their back, through their shoulders, start firing, then they can engage their core and their top line, and so then we get that elevation in the stride where movement is graceful and it looks easy. is the easiest thing that I can think of to describe it. So it'd be the difference between me being such a big heffalump elephant trying to dance compared to an actual proper dancer trying to dance. So somebody that spent a lifetime dedicating their body to movement learns how to move gracefully, how to hold themselves so that they cover the ground with each step. Me, I've learnt how to do it with the horses so I didn't have to figure it out for myself because I don't like applying myself to movement unless I'm on a horse. So when we start seeing that power and those muscles kind of conditioning and that condition developing through the rest of their body, then they start moving across the ground a lot more gracefully and freely, and that's what we describe as forwardness. There is a very tricky spot in the middle where the strength of the hindquarters develops before the forehand does, and so all of that power is kind of shoving the forehand along, and the top line hasn't developed enough to lift the shoulders yet. Normally it happens on the other side of developing a working canter as well. So at this stage here, we get lots of rearing because the only way the horse knows how to release that pressure is to go up, or we get lots of bucking, or we can get bolting as well. But there's normally a bit of spookiness underlying that as well. So if you're always getting a buck into your canter transition, if your horse is like kind of roaching up through the back when you're trying to mount and they're always cold backed, then you've probably got the back end building up really nicely, but we're waiting for the forehand and the top line to catch up with that amount of development, and so the hindquarters is like getting too stuck under and not actually sitting, and so the only way to release that pressure is to kick out. So when we have that power building up and flowing through, we get really nice ground coverage, and that's what our forwardness is. So the other thing that we're looking for is balance, and I talk about balance as weight distribution initially. So all horses, like all people, just are crooked. You won't find a straight human, you won't find a straight horse. It doesn't matter how hard we work on it, we will always, be one side dominant, and the horses will be more supple one way, or stronger, or more powerful, or weaker. And so balance is trying to establish that same amount of strength through their whole body, the same amount of suppleness through their whole body, which means focusing a bit on weaknesses and not overdoing the side that they're very coordinated in and comfortable in, which we tend to do because we're like, oh, look how good my horse is this way, let me show you. And oh, I enjoy riding my horse this way, he's so much more comfortable. And so we can tend to overdo the well-developed side and underdo the underdeveloped side because it's not as fun when they're less coordinated and don't feel as nice. So balance is being able to get that evenness built through their whole body. So we're creating that environmental stress that affects the different parts of their body to encourage it to develop evenly through their whole body. But the other thing that I really focus on is weight distribution. So our horses very often will tend to lean into one shoulder more than the other, and will lean into, well, more so they'll disengage one hind more than the other. So one of our most baby training steps is shifting weight distribution. Can you balance into your left shoulder? Can you balance into your right shoulder? Can you step that hind leg through? Can you step that hind leg through? And so once we get the maneuverability, which was the next one, once we start getting the maneuverability of the chest, the shoulders, and the hindquarters, all the horse is comfortable putting weight into each leg, then we start to see some balance, because we can ask them to go one way and they don't lean more into one shoulder and create more concussion in that shoulder than the other. So then maneuverability is kind of the end result of self-carriage, and it's why we want self-carriage. Anybody that's ridden a green horse will totally understand this. Anybody who's ridden a horse off the track or green broken anything, or ridden a green broken horse, I was just actually talking to one of my students about it tonight. You know, that first ride is like all the horses trying to figure out where its stride is to balance you. And so when we have self-carriage, the turns that you can create get tighter, and the transitions get smoother. And so you'll go from, you know, if we're talking about the thoroughbreds or the standardbreds off the track, you'll go from, you know, a long, strung out horse that you're like trying to pull a rein and it's like doing a like big old fall out through shoulder arc, to something that you can sit and spin and have some maneuverability. But even with the ponies, you need the same kind of balance and forwardness to you know, keep them from motorbiking around the corners and going near, and then actually throwing you off balance, and they're being actually really balanced because they have a low center of gravity. So we're trying to establish that our horse is just, we can ask it to do things, and we don't have them falling over and face planting the ground, and they actually can control themselves through a turn, and they're not falling in and they're not falling out, and just all of those things that make riding enjoyable. A lot of the times we will get a horse that's already at that stage, but I have not yet worked with a horse, and maybe it's because I get to work with all of the horses that are broken, but I have not yet had a horse that doesn't have gaps in its learning. And so this is where that big overall goal of soundness is it's not just how our horse performs and how it presents and how it looks, but at the core, it's that what we're doing is actually of benefit to our horse and is giving them a longer career that they are sounder for throughout, so that we have them through until they're old, and we can keep them in work even when they are old. So the last thing to talk about is the breeds, and we've already touched on that a little bit, but obviously we have to be very aware of what our particular horse is capable of and what that breed can do, because they are specifically bred to do tasks. Like, you know, asking a Clydesdale to race a racehorse, you know that the racehorse is going to win every time. But asking the racehorse for power against the Clydesdale, depending on the Clydie that you're working with, I guess, the Clydesdale is going to show the thoroughbred up. So we have to also know what we're working with. So the different breeds are going to be able to provide different levels of forwardness naturally, different levels of balance naturally, and where they want to distribute the weight. So all of our heavy horses, like our Clydes, our drafts, our Persies, anything, our Cobs, anything that has been bred to pull and that is heavy is going to really struggle getting into its hindquarters. So you are going to spend a lot of time asking that horse to develop its engagement and its power for forwardness from behind. All of our horses that are bred for speed we're going to be asking them to slow down and to develop a relaxed stride rather than a speedy stride. So what we're trying to see, it can be really easy, especially if you're chopping and changing between horses, to ride our heavy horses too fast because they feel like they're going slow. And it can be the same with our ponies because they naturally got a short choppy stride. We can end up overdoing it with them as well. We need to be aware of, and this is the other thing that we work on with developing self-carriage, is what do the polar opposites of what that horse can do look like? What does too slow look like? What does too fast look like? What does too much bend look like? What does too much crooked look like? What does too deep a frame look like? What does too hollow look like? And so when we know what those polar opposites and those extremes of what they are capable of doing look like, then we can find the middle, and the middle is self-carriage. And so that's where movement is dynamic, and we're creating a dynamic movement to figure out how our horse should move naturally and to engage its core. If you are kind of just like going round and round and round and round the same circle, the same direction, then your horse is going to figure that circle out and they're going to figure out how to cheat on it. It's through dropping the hip and dropping the shoulder or leaning in. If you're just going around and around and around the same pace, your horse is going to figure out how to cheat on that pace. And so they're going to end up either working behind your leg or running through the bit. So it's just, constantly asking for different shape sizes, directions and speeds to ask our horse to hold itself. And we want them to hold themselves without balancing on us. And then to do that, we also need to have an independent seat that we're not balancing on them, which is another trick in itself. So I hope you guys have a little bit more clarity about what self-carriage is. And in my books, you'll definitely, if you're following other Facebook groups that talk about this topic, there's definitely lots and lots and lots of opinions on it. So, just simplify it. Keep your horse sound. How are you going to keep your horse sound and feeling good in movement? And from there, develop their athleticism and their potential. And then from there, if you want to go and compete, then have fun. I don't think everybody in here is trying to go to the Olympics, so you're not trying to win the gold. So just enjoy your horse. Have a lovely week, guys. See you later.